If you love Push Black's Black History Year, you'll love our newest podcast called 2 Minute Black History. In only 2 minutes, you'll hear little-known stories about our people and reclaim the knowledge we need to take action and advance our community. To move towards the future, you've got to look to the past. Learn the history you didn't get in school. Tune in to 2 Minute Black History every Tuesday through Friday, right on the Black History Year feed and wherever you listen to podcasts.
We ain't asked to come here, but they brought us and they bought us anyway. We ain't want to work for them, but they beat us into service. And after we fought off their oppression and won our hard-earned freedom, they wouldn't share a slice of their precious apple pie. The right to earn a living wage under just and safe work conditions should be as inalienable a right as a freedom of speech. But white supremacy sought to keep black workers from the best jobs, the strongest industries, and their sacred labor unions. I'm Jay from Push Black, and you're listening to Black History Year. America's history of black labor is rooted in injustice. Our struggle to be heard in the workforce dates pretty far back. Let's look at 1869, when the Colored National Labor Union was formed, uniting black folks across the country in response to the exclusion of black workers that every other union in the country practiced. The Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, established in 1925, was one of the first black-led labor organizations. It had such a strong presence in the railroad industry that it's often credited as creating the black middle class. No longer standing on the wrong side of union hall doors, black workers today occupy more seats at the labor union table than any other race or ethnicity in America. What does that mean in our continuing fight for liberation? Here to help us explore the answer is an outspoken organizer who's one of the folks leading the way. Bianca Cunningham is the campaign director at the Action Center on Race and the Economy, a nonprofit that directly takes on the financial institutions and anti-democratic actors that are responsible for pillaging black communities, poor families, subverting voting rights, and destroying our environment. She's also the co-founder of the AfroSocialists and Socialists of Color Caucus of the Democratic Socialists of America. Bianca began her journey in 2014 when she organized her Verizon co-workers in Brooklyn to join the Communication Workers of America union. This was a first for retail workers at the company. She'll share that story and more, including her views on the state of current labor conditions. First up, a crash course on the triumphs of unionized black workers.
Despite a troubling history with racist exclusion, today black workers are currently the most represented racial group in U.S. labor unions. And as union membership grows, they're winning powerful concessions from often hostile corporations. Labor unions fight against some of the biggest hardships U.S. workers face, such as wage theft and dangerous working conditions. Recently, Amazon, Starbucks, and Apple workers are organizing to get union membership for their workforces. Some of these moves are historical firsts for corporations that, historically, have not granted workers the rights they deserve. Black workers have actually been at the forefront of these worker activism triumphs for quite some time. For generations, white workers excluded black workers from joining labor unions. They were able to force black workers into very specific industries and leave the desirable jobs to their own people. The American League of Colored Laborers, most likely the first black union to form in the United States, was led by abolitionist Frederick Douglass. Later, The Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, led by A. Philip Randolph, was crucial in fighting for Black workers' rights and contributed to President Roosevelt's historic labor rights legislation in 1938. All workers deserve a living wage and to be treated with respect. The growth in Black labor union organizing is an inspiring effort to move our country in a more just direction.
Bianca, what does Black liberation look like to you?
Oh, Black liberation looks like to me the ability to name ourselves, feel what we feel, achieve prosperity, see our families grow and prosper. It's our ability to exist on our own freely in whatever way and form that takes for each and every one of us.
Have you always held that perspective? Can you trace sort of how that developed?
Yeah, so for me, so much of my lived experience is based on these societal conditions, right, that are put on us, the condition that we need to work. My own struggles of trying to unionize my workplace so that I can have a voice on the job and just go to work and do what I'm supposed to do without people harassing me. And so, yeah, I would say that my definition of Black liberation has come out of my lived experience and feeling like I'm always having to fit myself in a box or in a space that somebody else has already created and deemed was for me, or maybe force myself into a space that wasn't made for me is a better way to say it.
Can you describe for me how you are working towards that vision of liberation through the work that you do?
I'm a union organizer by trade. I didn't go to school for that, like many people do. I didn't even know what a union organizer was before, I experienced complications or, issues at my own workplace. I was working for Verizon Wireless retail store in Brooklyn and, had all these dreams coming out of college about, what my degree would bring me and what it would mean to be in corporate America. Ended up in corporate America and decided I didn't want to do that. And so ended up in the store. And some of the dynamics that I saw happening in the store, being sexually harassed by male management, I worked off of commission and I felt like so much of my ability to make ends meet was hindered by patriarchy and capitalism and all these other like outside forces. I unionized my workplace. I got fired for that unionization. And then I got introduced to, the ideology of socialism. And there's all kinds of things within that story. I had to go on strike. And so that, that was school for me to try to learn, like, what does it look like when you're trying to, fight for better, what corporate forces come against you. Right now, I find myself in the South, primarily organizing, even though I still do reside in Brooklyn. And what we're trying to help them do is, well, number one, get resources there because they're incredibly underfunded and underinvested in, but also help them create like infrastructure of organizing to figure out what is it that they want to see for their own communities and help them provide a framework for them and help them knit those pieces together, so that they can achieve their own self-determination in the South. That's what I do day to day for liberation. And then I also do my own work of unlearning my internal patriarchy, my internal white supremacy, my internal all the isms, right? That growing up in a Church of God in Christ household, has definitely instilled into me and things that I need to unlearn.
I'd like to take a step back to the story of you organizing at Verizon Wireless. What was the tipping point for you? And okay, now I have to do something.
That's a great question. So when I transferred to the retail store, I had been working in the call center previously. And so this was a transfer. And immediately I understood what management discretion meant because I felt like I was working in one company. There should be one set of rules and they should be applicable to, whatever department. And what I really found was that the store that I was in was a fiefdom. It was completely disconnected from any level of accountability as far as rules, our ability to take breaks, our ability to see our schedules in advance, et cetera. And so kind of this had been building from the moment I got into the retail store, realizing, oh, wait a minute, this is not right. What's different, et cetera. But that's like normal. Like we all have, issues around our jobs and, don't have difficult bosses, et cetera. I think for me, really the tipping point was a couple years into working in the retail store when we had a particularly abusive manager who was really rigid in the things that she asked us to do, really rigid in our scheduling, and really just making everybody's life a living hell. We used to collectively call HR together because we thought there was no way the company can know that she's operating in this way, right? We were taking collective action even back then before we even understood what collective action was. No response from HR. Eventually, because so many people did call, they did decide to transfer her out, and so we were all relieved because we felt like we had been dealing with this terrible manager for so long, and this is now we're going to get somebody new. And in comes, this really young Black guy who we all thought was going to be super cool, and who ended up, sexually assaulting and harassing almost half of the women in the store. I endured things like him walking behind me, on the stairs, or bending over behind me and making comments about what I was wearing. He used to call me Boo Fang. That was his public nickname of me. And so we kind of went through this, and I would say that it was like really complicated for us because like we wanted to support him as like a young Black manager, right? Understanding that like we like to see our own people like succeed. It was a good job, good paying job. He had a family and a wife and everything. But one of the women he ended up locking her into a storage closet in the inventory closet to inquire about who was sending her flowers. And so she decided to blow the whistle without telling any of us. And I think it was interesting to see how it played out because, half of us wanted to come to her and affirm her experience and say, yes, we have probably been overlooking or feeling uncomfortable in certain ways, but feeling because of the power dynamic of him being our manager, we couldn't really say anything. She decided to say something. And I think the other half of the women were really angry and saying, like, why would you want to take down this Black man, right? Like, why do you want to destroy his character? HR did the investigation. By that time, I was completely like mentally exhausted and drained just from having like one after the other bad manager who, and spending most of my time at work and really feeling like really, really like a shell of myself. And so I took some time off through the FMLA process. And when I came back, that manager was fired, but they also let me know that I was going to be assigned to a different store in Brooklyn. And when I went to that store, another Black manager, most of my coworkers are Black and at the time and wanted to get along, wanted to start fresh, etc. And then when it came time, I was probably back for about 2 months, and it came time to do our performance reviews for the year so that we can review what our raises were going to be, etc. And he basically pulled me into the office and said, "You haven't even been here for the last couple of months. I haven't worked with you. I look out for my favorites and the people who look out for me. And so I'm going to give you the bare minimum." I think he gave me a 1% raise when really the norm is like 3 to 4% with that explanation. And I remember that he left his computer, like he was using the computer on the floor, on the sales floor, and left it unlocked. And I went behind him and just happened to see how he allocated the raises. Some of his favorites getting 6 and 7% raises, while people like me getting 1%. And I thought about this and I was like, listen, you've had 3 iterations of bad managers at this point. If you're not ready to unionize right now, and I was just like, this is not even a personal thing anymore. This is just like, we have to have a structural response to this type of behavior, whether it's favoritism, whether it's sexual harassment, whether it's bullying, et cetera. And so that was what really made me pull the trigger in wanting to reach out to a union to figure out what our options were.
So at this point, how had you been politicized to be thinking along the lines of unionizing?
I have to say that, like, I did not grow up in a union household. I grew up in an Air Force household. My grandparents were in the union, and so I vaguely remember, my grandfather in the factory in Virginia going on strike when I was a kid, but not really. But one of the things so I wasn't super politicized, and I didn't even really know. Like, I remember calling through my family members to say, I'm a very spiritual person. I'm praying about it. I'm fasting on the idea of reaching out to the union. And I remember my family telling me, what their experiences had been with the union. But the picture that was really clear in my mind was that, Brooklyn is a blue collar town. So it's often that you see people, especially old Brooklyn, not this new gentrified Brooklyn, but the old Brooklyn, you see people with their union jackets on. We'd see people come in and we'd recognize, wow, we're working for the same company. Even the people that work for the landline side who like climb the poles and do like that kind of old school and maintain the network, et cetera. Like, we realized that like these people, we work for the same company. we feel like we're bringing in as a cell phone service, right? As a cell phone, like that's a new thing, bringing up in a bulk of revenue for this company. Yet these other people are able to buy houses in Brooklyn, put their kids through school, seem like they're really, when you talk to them, they're really happy about their benefits. We see the discount they get with us. What is the difference between us and them if we have the same board of directors? And so I really didn't have a lot of experience except for seeing, working people around Brooklyn who had city jobs, union jobs, et cetera, really thriving, and wondering why me and my coworkers couldn't afford to move, out of our parents' house or live alone or, really survive in this economy by ourselves. And so that is like what was on the top of my mind. We need what they have, because what they have seems to be like working really well for them.
What happens next? You start this process, and what happens next?
We start this process, and immediately the company takes us to court to contest it. And I want to talk about this because unionization is like popular right now, and there's like more new organizing happening in the country than, in a long time. And so I think this is really important for people to know. So what happens is that they take you to court and they challenge to say like your unit or the people who could be included into the unit. And they say, we could go to trial knowing that trial is going to take months to have. And then you have to actually go through the trial and have the judge decide about the unit. And so what they do is say, well, we could go to trial, or they pick a date that's maybe like 3 months out, right? And this is before Obama made like the 3-week turnaround rule for organizing. The 3-week turnaround rule means that you have to have an election within 3 weeks of the workers filing for an election. That was before then. So they were able to get 3 months out of us. So they want that time for a reason, because that's the time that they're going to run their anti-union campaign, try to scare people and intimidate people so that, when you go to the National Labor Relations Board, you have to have like a certain percentage of the employees on cards and a signature to sign cards to say that they want a union and then that's what triggers the election. What the company is trying to do in that 3 months is peel people off until the numbers are in their favor. So we pick an election date, and the company starts their anti-union campaign. Anti-union campaign includes a lot of things. It includes taking employees away from everyone else into a basement to try to talk to them about, whether or not they want to keep their job. They can't really, they do break the law. They're trying not to break the law in a lot of cases. And so they're beating around the bush, trying to intimidate you to say, like, if you support the union, you can't be on our side, or you may lose your job, or the union won't really win anything for you. They'll just take you out on strike and use you as a tool. It also included things like the CEO of the company and the CFO of the company coming to do store visits between all of us to say, like, is everything okay? I'm just here to listen. I'm just here, because I'm hearing you guys have some concerns. I think that we can solve this as a family. It includes what we call captive audience meetings, where all the employees are brought into one room, and the manager will do something called like union education, where they'll try to like show you videos to intimidate you from wanting to join the union, say the union is violent, the union is full of thugs, it's the losing side, etc. But then they also went as far as to target, some of the people who were like pursuing citizenship in the United States and here on work visa, to say like, it would be a shame if you didn't get your citizenship because you didn't have a job, because you wanted to support this union. Pulled one woman to the side and said, aren't you in a custody fight? This is a huge distraction from that. It would be a shame if you lost custody of your child because you were trying to be active in this political, union. Like, forget it. So they do that for 3 months. We stand strong because of, exercising solidarity, exercising clear channels of communication, warning one another, they're on your way to you. This is what they said to us. This is what we said, just being really transparent with one another. We end up winning 3 months later, decisively. And then you go into a process where your coworkers and you decide who do you want to send to the table, the negotiations table, the bargaining table, to represent your interests. It will be a number of your coworkers, as well as some representatives from the union itself, a lawyer, et cetera. We go into that process thinking everything that we saw on TV is true, where you sit across the table, you put a proposal, they put a counter proposal, and then the negotiations happen. What actually happens is that they hire one of the worst union busters in the country from Hertz, which was on the 10 worst places to work back then. And he sits across the table from us, and we put forward proposals that include dress code, the ability to have bulletin boards, things around scheduling, any number of issues based on what our coworkers are saying is most important to them. And they actually just say, we're not interested in this proposal, and push it back to us. So we did this for a year with no counters, okay? A year, going in every single day, going to 140 West Street, meeting with the company for them to say, we're not interested, with no counter proposals. We actually at one point put a proposal across the table for a penny raise, which they also said they weren't interested in. That was my crash course. And I always thought these kinds of things were about money. The company wants to save money, or, they're trying to protect the coin and we're trying to get the coin. It's not about money. It's about power and the discretion to change things as they see fit. And so about a year in, we tried to prove that they're not bargaining in good faith, but it's very hard to prove that at the Labor Relations Board. And so the union comes to us and says, I think you're going to have to go on strike for your first contract, which is at that time unheard of. Now you see that more, but back then, not really a thing.
This was about a year into it. Y'all were still going to work though, but also negotiating.
Going to work. Going to work like normal. It's still tense, right? Because there's this negotiations going on, but it's me and two coworkers that are in negotiations. And then we're just disseminating the information back to all of our, 100 plus coworkers who, are waiting to see when can we get a deal.
On the strike part, and I want to ask, because I know many people in our audience might be thinking, damn, if I go on strike, I'm gonna, there might be some kind of serious repercussion, might not be able to pay my bills or whatever. So what concerns did you face personally or from your coworkers when y'all were deciding to go on a strike?
I think the first obstacle that we had was that was a talking point that the company used at first, to say the union's just going to take you on strike. And the union organizers' response was, that's silly. Nobody goes on a strike for a first contract, not being able to foresee how hard the fight would be. And so when we dispelled that myth from in the beginning, to say we're not going to go on strike, right? That's crazy. A year later, when they come back and say, I think you're going to have to go on strike, it's like, ooh, that's not going to go over too well. And so I remember, you have something called a strike authorization vote. Everybody comes for a meeting. We met on a Sunday night or something where nobody was working. And, they talk about the reasons that we want to go on strike. The union that we were striking with, Communication Workers of America, is what we would call like a militant union that has a history of striking. And so they have something called a strike fund. When you pay dues into the union, they put those dues to the side and put them in a fund. So if the workers do have to go on strike, they can allocate those funds on a weekly basis. So for instance, your first week of striking, I think you get $100, and so on and so forth. Second week, 2, third week, 3, fourth week, 4. And in the meantime, they're giving out grocery cards and, trying to do everything to figure out how to also put extra funds towards the things that you need. And then once you're on strike for a little bit, you start to unemployment triggers. So I will say that and this is why I don't believe that insurance should be tied to employment. One of the points of leverage that they had over me and my coworkers was our health insurance. And so a month into our strike, they turned our benefits off. And that became a huge issue because we had people with high-risk pregnancy, et cetera, that needed to see specialists. And the COBRA plan that triggers for the state just wasn't the same level of coverage that the employer was giving. And so that actually caused a lot of people to go back and come off the strike line and go back into the store. In the meantime, they're running the store with managers who they've flown in from different parts of the country because we're outside.
Wow. So this is like a low-key form of violence, pulling the healthcare when folks have these issues that they're dealing with.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay. So 49 days comes, then what happens? 49
days comes and we're exhausted. I want to say to people that it's harder. It sounds like, oh, those workers just want to go on strike because they don't want to work or they're lazy. When in reality, striking is way harder than going to work. Striking is like protecting the door, shouting out into the abyss, like talking to people about why they shouldn't cross your picket line, stressing about money in the background. Like it is exhausting physically and mentally. But 49 days comes and they say, we have an agreement. And so at that point, they didn't call. And I want to say this too, because it was wrong what they did. And all unions are not like this, but this did happen. They actually did a meeting in DC and they didn't invite us. And so when they were announcing that there was a agreement, my coworkers are calling me and I have no idea what's in the agreement because we hadn't had any tentative agreements on the table and nobody involved us into the process. What they did do for us, what they did negotiate for us was ended up being a grievance procedure, which means that you have the right to challenge discipline or decisions that the management makes, and the ability to see an arbitrator in those challenges. And people were really disappointed, but that's kind of like the backbone of what unions are: due process and a grievance procedure. It means that they can't fire you and that you're not an at-will employee anymore, that you have a process that they have to, go through. So then what happens is they present these agreements to me and my coworkers, and we have a meeting and people can vote yes or no. People had a lot of reservations about saying yes to that agreement. They felt like the level of fight that we had put up and the things that we had sacrificed and been through didn't equal to what they saw that we won on the paper. And so the expectations were sky high because everybody had felt like we put it all out on the line. And then there was also people that were like, listen, I've been in this process, like me, I've been in this process. I've seen how little, we were able to squeeze out of them. I think that we should just take this and use it as a foundation to fight for in the future. And it really tore apart friendships and relationships through that vote. But ultimately it did pass. And so they have that and have been able to build upon that in the years since.
If you could sum up how you say you grew as a person after that experience, how would you describe that?
I just understood the world in a different way. Like I said, I understood that it's not really all about money sometimes. Its power is just equally as important. I understood how much, like how to what length corporations, the ruling class, the rich people in this country will go to stop you from having any kind of say-so about your own working conditions and about how they're actually pretty staunch or firm in their position, because if they let one go, they see it as a bowling, kind of domino effect that if one company has it, then the rest of the companies will be affected. And I also learned about who shows up in those times. And so in those times of walking the picket line, being completely exhausted, we had people from the community bringing us food, honking their horn as they're passing by, letting us know that we support you. And so it let me know that, this fight to keep jobs middle class, to protect middle class America and the working poor is like something that we all feel deeply, and we're all in this fight together. Many of the folks who came out to the picket line to show solidarity, whether it was through food or through just like walking alongside us, even some organizations, said we will adopt a picket line, so they would allow for me and my coworkers to maybe go home an hour early and they will hold it down for us, right? So some of those folks were socialists, and that's how I learned about socialism. I also want to say something about race and race dynamics though too, because my union is a lot of white guys, and there was some racial tension there. The leadership was always like super supportive of our efforts to unionize. We would have to use the union hall to meet before we ever won a union. 10 o'clock at night, they'd have to open it for us because everybody was working retail. So we're meeting at 10, 11 p.m. at night. That's where our union meetings are happening, right? And they were very gracious in that. But I would say that when we got on the picket line, originally everybody, 7 stores, everybody was just assigned, just go outside of your own store. When you go outside of your own store, there's also people from the landlord side that are holding down a picket line there. So what ended up happening is that we were all young, Black and brown, individuals. And most of the people that were on the strike line were like old time. They had been doing this for years, sometimes some of them decades, very white, very old school Brooklyn, very like that. And so we saw the ways in which they antagonize people who cross the line. No, we don't want anybody to cross the picket line. True. Yes, we don't like scabs, as we call them, people who cross the picket line, people who say, I don't care, I just need what I need. And, whatever, forget whatever the rest of you guys are talking about. We don't like that. But that doesn't mean that we call them the N-word. That doesn't mean that we display Islamophobia. And those are things that we saw from the union members there. And it caused people to be like, what am I doing here? This can't be my group. I don't see myself here, right? So much so that at one point I had to make an executive decision and tell the union, hey, give me a van. Or give me a couple charter buses. I got to put all my people on charter buses and we can just go around, because the whole city was on strike. It wasn't just Brooklyn. It was a whole city, New York City. So we got to go around and visit different picket lines and just stay together in our solidarity, because we're going to lose people if they have to experience this on the picket line on their own. I also saw how the police respond to picket lines. The police generally in the past have always kind of like left picket lines alone. It's because most of the time those have been filled of white, straight men. And so there's like this, I've seen how they handle them. It's just different. Even when they have something to say, like don't yell or you can't stand over there. It's just in a bro kind of way, like in a mutual respect kind of way. Versus when it's us on the picket line, it's like, what are you doing here? You're I'm going to write you a ticket for being on the sidewalk, etc. And so understanding that this is like, they say labor is all together, but we don't experience these things the same way, right? We experience these things very different. And so all of that kind of stuff like kind of woke me up to like kind of this like lullaby that they had sang me in the beginning of like this sister between the labor movement and the civil rights movement, and they're intertwined, and there always have been. And it's just like, no, that's not true. There are still divisions even within organized labor, right?
You mentioned that around this time is when you got introduced to socialists. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes, that's right.
Tell me about that.
Sure. So first and foremost, the first organizer that was sent to me from the union, from CWA, happened to be a young man. And when I met him at a subway, this is in the beginning, this is my first contact with the union. Met him in the beginning. He seemed like a cool guy, young white guy, around my same age, maybe a little younger. And he starts talking to me about his experience of Occupy Wall Street, and about how he was one of the organizers, and about how this, fight against the corporation is just like the 99% against the 1%, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember going back to my coworkers and saying, okay, and describing our meeting. And everybody was so moved and like impressed with the fact that he was from Occupy Wall Street, because that was a movement that had really resonated with a lot of young people, including us, right? And so we were like, okay, he seems like the real deal. Like, this doesn't seem like a game. This seems like this is going to be serious. Fast forward to when we were on strike, and I mentioned that there were some groups that were coming out to, show love, help out, run fundraisers for us, have us come in as speaking. We start to realize, okay, these are socialists. They're saying that they're self-proclaimed socialists. At this time, the DSA, or the Democratic Socialists of America, as like what, how we'll refer to it probably going forward, is not in existence as an organization in New York City. As a matter of fact, what they say is like, they invite us to reading groups, and we learn about capitalism and how our struggle is tied into the struggle of all working people, in the fight for socialism, and taking the means of production, all of these things, right? And it's really resonating with me, mostly because I grew up in a Church of God in Christ household and was forced to read the Bible so much. And what I actually got out of the Bible was like what I would call like the fundamental like socialist principles about taking care of your neighbor, looking out for the poor, just doing for one another in the way that we would want, to be treated, et cetera, like those very basic principles. And so it resonated with me. And me and my coworkers decided like these were cool people. Like, these are the people that are showing up for us, because there wasn't anybody else showing up for us really, besides a couple politicians. They come to me and they say, hey, listen, there's this thing called Democratic Socialists of America that's kind of defunct here. The chapter doesn't really exist anymore, but we think we want to take it over and build something new. And we think somebody like, you all are like at the forefront of like worker organizing and building worker power in the city, and kind of the face of this. We think that like if we join forces, we could really do something really special. And so that's how I got introduced into the Democratic Socialists of America, and got into the process of like building what we know now as the DSA New York City chapter.
When it comes to union organizing, is this something that is for everybody that has a job, or are there specific types of situations where that it's beneficial for? How should our audience be thinking about this?
As far as who should have a union,
Yeah.
everyone should have a union.
Okay.
The union is
Okay.
for everyone. And I want to say that clearly, too, because it's one of the things that the management said to us right after we won the union. They said, it's cool, you guys won you won your union election, but, you're never really going to get a contract because unions aren't for retail. Like, that doesn't go together. Unions are really for factories, or for different types of jobs, not or city jobs, not for retail. So it's not really going to work in your case. But unions are and can be for anyone. We just have to be creative about the way that we approach the solutions.
Okay. So if someone's listening to this and they're inspired to take some kind of action, if there's not currently a union in their workplace, how can they be thinking about taking steps towards organizing their coworkers?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, the way that I went about it is just thinking about who are the people who I think would want a union in our workplace. You're thinking about the people who complain a lot, the people who you've seen get the short end of the stick, looked over for promotions, etc. I identified one of those people in every one of the Brooklyn stores, 7 stores. So whenever I met the union organizer for the first time, I actually had what is essentially an organizing committee, which is what you want to think about. It should be about 10% of the number of people that you see being a part of the union shop, is what we call it. You need about 10% of those people represented in an organizing committee. And you need to go a step further and make sure that different positions are represented, that it's diverse and it actually represents what the actual unit looks like. But once you talk to people and you say, what do you think about this? And you do it really discreetly too, by the way, because you're going to get fired if they find out that you're having these conversations with your coworkers before you actually go into a formal process. So you do it discreetly, you talk to people who you trust, and then you start to make a list and say, who are all the people in our workplace? And then you rate them. 1 is somebody who you think is going to be super supportive for the union. 2 is somebody who you really just don't know, but you might have to have a conversation with them. And then 3 is somebody who is like manager. These are the people who managers love, managers' pets, the people who are close to them. You leave them out because you know automatically that they're probably going to snitch on you. So you do that categorization and then you look at the numbers. Does it make sense for us to pursue this? Do we have enough 1s and 2s here to go ahead and keep having conversations and do outreach? You also want to be mindful of the type of union that you're reaching out to. There's some unions like United Auto Workers who just don't do auto organizing, right? Once upon a time, they were just in the factory, but now, they represent higher ed employees and all kinds of positions, staff positions from lots of different institutions. And so you figure out who are the fighting unions around me. And when I say fighting unions, you've heard about them going on a strike. You've seen them out in the streets, maybe, doing information or passing out flyers. Somebody who is active and on their members' behalf. And you reach out to them and then you say, you all decide, which union you want to go with. But you do all this, and I can't stress it enough, discreetly, because it is very dangerous. The company takes union organizing very seriously, and it's not just Verizon Wireless that did that. It's not just Verizon that just did that. But, we actually learned from their side, because of some leaked documents, that they actually have a metric that they follow. So there's signs to look for managers to look for to see if your workers are organizing or not. And if you trigger 2 of those things in Verizon, they send what they call a jump team on a plane to the store to investigate and kind of interview people themselves. And the things could be really simple, like seeing coworkers huddled into a corner talking, right? That's on their things. That's on their list of suspect behavior. And so just knowing that they know what to look for. And so you have to be I can't stress it enough, be discreet, be low with it.
Bianca Cunningham, thank you for joining us on Black History Year.
Thank you for having me.
That was Bianca Cunningham of the Action Center for Race and the Economy, or ACRE. If you want to learn more about her work and you're looking to get involved, visit acrecampaigns.org. That's ACRE campaigns.org.
At Push Black, we agree with Marcus Garvey when he said, "A people without knowledge of their past, history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." And I'm guessing you probably feel like that's important too. I mean, you're here at the end of a podcast about Black history. You matter. Your choice to be here matters. It lets us know that you value this work. And you make Push Black happen with your contributions at blackhistoryyear.com. Most folks do $5 or $10 a month, but really everything makes a difference. Thank you for supporting the work. Black History Year is a production of Push Black, the nation's largest nonprofit Black media company. Our team includes Tariq Alani, Brooke Brown, Tasha Taylor, and Lily Workna. Producing this episode, we have Sydney Smith and Lynn Webb for Push Black, and Ronald Young Jr., who also edits the show. Black History Year's executive producers are Michael L. Sesser for Lemon House and Julian Walker for Push Black. Peace.